Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Today we are in southern Ohio and we're visiting a place called Fort Ancient, which is the largest hilltop enclosure in the United States, built by Native Americans around 2,000 years ago. We are currently at Fort Ancient Earthworks and Nature Preserve, located about halfway between Cincinnati and Dayton. There are a number of sites related to various prehistoric Native American mound builder cultures in Ohio, but we wanted to explore one of the lesser known sites. And based on this trail, I think we may be one of the first to walk through here in quite some time. I also think we're the tastiest things to walk through here in some time, or at least the local mosquitoes think so. But I'm hoping to get a look at the walls here. The walls, made entirely of earth, stretch for more than 3.5 miles, enclosing this plateau high above the surrounding valley. Over 500,000 cubic yards of soil were moved to create this site. No metal tools, no wheels, no draft animals, just baskets and human labor over generations. We've just come across a burial mound. According to a sign, this is called the Mills Mound, and it was excavated and reconstructed to look like it did before archaeologists went digging around in it. There are quite a few burial mounds scattered around Fort Ancient, and that brings me to something else. The scale of this place alone is mind-boggling, but what's even more remarkable is the purpose, because Fort Ancient is not a fort. There's a sign hidden here saying this is a stone circle, but I don't see it at all. It looks to have been reclaimed by nature. But here we can see one of the walls of Fort Ancient. For decades, people assumed this place was built for defense, but archaeologists now know that its many gateways would have made it nearly impossible to defend. We're going to see if we can find a better spot to see the walls, because the overgrowth in this area makes it nearly impossible. And I wasn't kidding about this trail being lightly used. There were a couple points back there where we almost lost it. When this place was first discovered, archaeologists of the time thought it was a fort, and they thought it was old. And I always say that people of the past weren't very creative of naming things, so they called it Fort Ancient. But if it wasn't a fort, then what was it? Well, archaeologists now believe that it was a ceremonial gathering place, and maybe something more. And it looks like we've made it out of the woods, and we are back at the visitor center. Here's another burial mound by the visitor center. There are a number of mounds throughout this field. There is also evidence that there was once sort of a wood henge here, or a circular arrangement of wooden posts, and that sacred ceremonies possibly happened here. One thing archaeologists are pretty sure about, though, is that there was never a village here. We've moved to what's called the middle fort, and it's narrower here, so it's a little easier to see the walls. These walls would have been about 1 to 3 feet taller when they were built, but 2,000 years of weather has eroded them somewhat. At their highest point now, they're about 23 feet high. There are actually 3 sections of Fort Ancient, with the South Fort being built first, followed by the middle, and then the North Fort being the newest, having been built sometime between AD 1 and AD 200. We are now in the South Fort, at a place called the North Overlook, And to make things even more confusing, about 1,000 years ago, there was a village occupied the people of the Fort Ancient culture below us, and that culture had nothing to do with the building of this place. The Little Miami River is also below us, and that bridge in the distance is Interstate 71. I'm back in the woods on what's called the Earthworks Trail to try to get a better look at the walls. You could see them through the vegetation here. This might get a little confusing, so please bear with me. But when this place was discovered, they thought it was made by the Fort Ancient Culture, a prehistoric Native American culture that was around from about AD 1000 to the early 1700s. That culture was even named after this site. But it turned out this place dates back much further than that, and was built by the Hopewell Culture, which was around from about 100 BC to AD 500. People of the Fort Ancient culture did later occupy this site, but Fort Ancient, who the Fort Ancient culture is named for, did not build the place the culture is named after. Oh, and the Hopewell culture, who did build this place, they're named after a 19th century farmer on whose land artifacts were first found. The Hopewell culture built massive earthworks all over Ohio, and they weren't just local. They had a trade network that stretched thousands of miles. Artifacts from as far away as the Rocky Mountains have been found here. Right up here we can see one of the gateways in the walls. Some of these gateways were aligned with the rising and setting sun during the solstices and equinoxes. This place was kind of a giant calendar. The mosquitoes here are extremely happy to see me. If I stop for even a second, they become absolutely unbearable. I even had to put my jacket on to protect myself more, but that's just directing them to my hands and my face. My wife decided to wait in the car, they were getting so bad, but to be fair, I think they may have almost lifted her off the ground and were just going to take her away. So getting back to the walls, the Hopewell used the Earth as a calendar. By tracking the movement of the sun and moon, they marked the seasons and possibly even scheduled rituals, feasts, or planting. Some believe this site was used for ritual gatherings, bringing together hundreds, possibly thousands of people from scattered communities. But what did they do here? The truth is, no one really knows. There was no written language, no oral traditions that survived the centuries. All we have are whatever clues archaeologists can find. Some archaeologists believe that these gatherings involved ritual feasting, burial ceremonies, or seasonal rites to honor ancestors, their gods, or even the land itself. But we'll likely never know for sure. These mounds in front of us are crescent-shaped, and it's thought they were used to direct the flow of traffic as people approached what is now called the Great Gateway. And this is the Great Gateway. It separates the middle fort from the southern fort. In 2023, Fort Ancient became part of the UNESCO World Heritage List under the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks designation, placing it alongside places like Stonehenge and Machu Picchu in global significance. And to kind of put it in perspective, Stonehenge was already about 3,000 years old when construction began here, but Machu Picchu wouldn't begin construction for another 1,500 years. With advances in technology like LiDAR, More and more information is being learned about this place all the time, but we'll probably never truly know why it was built or built on the scale it was. Fort Ancient is pretty impressive, but to get a better idea of how people of the Fort Ancient culture lived, we're going to head about 35 miles from here to a place called SunWatch. We are now just outside of Dayton, Ohio, on the banks of the Great Miami River. This is the SunWatch Indian Village, and this entire site sat hidden for centuries, until the 1960s when archaeologists discovered something unexpected while preparing to build a sewage treatment plant. What they found here changed the understanding of the Fort Ancient culture, one of the most mysterious and fascinating Native American societies in the Midwest. Excavations here uncovered post holes, storage pits, and even burials, all telling the story of a complex, settled village that dates back to around AD 1200. If you've heard of the Mississippian culture that was around at the same time, the Fort Ancient culture was kind of their rural cousins. Of course, the two huts they have here are reconstructions, but when this was an active village, it wasn't just a random arrangement of huts. The circular layout was very intentional. In the center was a large public plaza, possibly used for ceremonies or gatherings, and around it, family homes, food storage pits, and work areas. These structures were built with wooden poles, woven mats, and clay, so they were cool in the summer, warm in the winter, and families would live inside, they would cook inside, and they even stored food in underground pits to help get through the harsh winters. The people of the Fort Ancient culture farmed corn, squash, and beans, and also hunted, fished, and gathered wild plants. Life here was deeply tied to the seasons and the land. Here's a look inside, and you can see all the raised bedding here. And they must have had a fire in the fire pit earlier today because I can still smell it. They were definitely advanced for 800 years ago. I mean, look, they even had fire extinguishers. No, I'm just kidding, of course. There was no fire extinguishers back then, aside from the nearby river. So this is somewhat what a Fort Ancient home would have looked like. One of the most unique features here is what archaeologists believe may have been a solar calendar, hence the name SunWatch. They found wooden posts aligned in a way that may have helped track the movements of the sun throughout the year, helping to guide agriculture and ceremonies. These posted off areas are outlines of where more homes would have been. At the village's height, they estimate that there was a population of about 250 people here. This village wasn't occupied for very long. Archaeologists believe it was abandoned after only about 20 years. Why? Well, that's still a mystery. It could have been something like disease, conflict, environmental pressures. Who knows? All that's left behind is a window into a culture that otherwise left no written records. One thing that's kind of misleading is had we come here 800 years ago, this would have looked far more colorful than it does now. There would have been things in here like baskets, blankets, furs, pottery. So this village dates to around 1200, but as I mentioned earlier, the Fort Ancient culture was around until the 1700s. Obviously, by that point, Europeans were well established in North America. And one thing I find really interesting is there are no historical accounts of any contact between Europeans and the Fort Ancient Culture. At some later Fort Ancient Culture sites, European artifacts have been found, including brass, steel, and glass, so it looks like they were acquiring goods from other native groups, but there's no evidence of direct contact. Unfortunately, they likely acquired something else as well: European diseases. Standing here, it's easy to forget that we're just minutes from a large city, but SunWatch gives us a glimpse into a world long gone that was almost forgotten. So that's our look at Fort Ancient and the mostly unrelated Fort Ancient Culture. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.